Good morning. My name is John Barrera. I'm one of the elders here at Friendship Alliance Church. And if you're, hi, how you guys doing? And if you're visiting or new to the church, we're a little unusual. We are an elder-led church, and that just means that the elders here, along with our pastors, are very involved in what goes on here, including preaching. So what we've been doing and are continuing to do is go through the core values of Friendship Alliance Church. And you may recall, we had started planning this back in the fall to do this as we led up to our annual meeting, which was already announced, to sort of give everybody a feel for how we lead at this church, how we make decisions and do things. And these principles help us because sometimes if we start to go off this way or that way, they help bring us back into alignment with why we exist. So Friendship Alliance, our mission is to strengthen families, to reach the world by strengthening families through Jesus Christ. That's our mission. That's what we try to do. Years ago, we decided we can't be every church to every people, every group, and we're not a huge church. And we're going to be about families and strengthening families in all types of situations. And everything, Jesus always strengthens families just by when people become Christians, the family is strengthened, right? So along with that, we had a group of the congregation, along with myself, we decided to sit down and what are our core values. And Mike preached several weeks ago on having a mission mindset. We are a Christian Missionary Alliance Church, and having a mission mindset, and you'll recall, and we're just trying to all, as we go about our days, we're not all in Africa, we're not all in Tunisia, we're not all in these places, but we are missionaries here wherever we are. So he spoke about that, and then Dan preached on strengthening the biblical foundation, which is what we're all about, right? The Bible, the Word of God is truth, and it is everything that the way we think and what we do think should be taken through the Bible is to have right thinking and alignment with the Lord. Now, when we were setting all this up, Mike quickly jumped on mission mindset, and then Dan grabbed biblical foundation, and I was left with faithfully using God's provision, which means money, the thing nobody wants to ever talk about. And I will say, if you're visiting or you're new, we hardly ever talk about money at this church. Hardly ever. Almost never. So I got the privilege of preaching about it today. And next week. But we're going to try and take a different perspective, a different view than what you might have. I mean, we all know what the Word says about giving to the Lord. So I want you all, as I go through this week and next week, I'm going to repeat it next week, for those that aren't here, to keep in mind that when I'm preaching or speaking, I'm speaking in examples and possibly principles. I don't know your finances, okay? I haven't looked at your checkbook. I don't know what you do with your finances. So, if you get offended, remember, I've been being offended for 3 months as I get prepared for today. So, I mean, the Lord's been offending me, okay? And we're going to be offended. We are a capitalistic culture and country which likes our money. And we don't like to just be giving it away. It's not something, and money gives us control, and money gives us things, and money gives us what our heart wants and what we've set our eyes upon. And one of the things we're going to talk about today is that the world has figured out a way to get our money. So, with that in mind, I also want to, in full disclosure, say, and I'm not saying this, those of you who know me, for any reason except for that I think it is pertinent to what I'm going to be talking about, is, how should I say this? I do have a master's degree in business. I've spent the last 30 years as a manager of people. It's what I do. I currently am a chief operating officer of a very large business, and I know a little bit on that topic. I also teach economics at Baldwin Wallace University, if you didn't know that. So I know a little bit about the way the world thinks about money. So what we're going to be doing, though, is we're going to be looking at Luke chapter 16. In Luke chapter 16, Jesus presents a parable that if you're just like reading it, and I know I read it for years, I'd be like, what? And then you just sort of gloss over it because it doesn't seem to make sense from a Christian perspective. You might look at it, and I was looking this up, you know how some Bibles put a little thing above each parable, oh, this is the prodigal son, or this is this. Well, it was interesting to me that on this one it said, it's the parable of the dishonest manager, the unrighteous steward, or the unjust manager. When in reality, Jesus, in the parable, tells us what he really was, which was shrewd. And only, I'll give the NIV credit, the NIV was the only Bible I found that called it the parable of the shrewd manager. And you want to be a little careful when you're looking at these little bylines in your Bible and stuff because they're not the Word of God, and they may be leading you to something that's not the conclusion, and I don't believe that's the conclusion of this. Obviously, that this guy was unjust or untrue, but we're going to unpack this. But let's go ahead and read it first, and then we'll talk a little bit about it. Luke 16, verse 1. He also said to the disciples, there was a rich man who had a manager, and charges were brought to him that this man was wasting his possessions. And he called him and said to him, what is this that I hear about you? Turn in the account of your management, for you can no longer be manager. And the manager said to himself, what shall I do? Since my master is taking the management away from me, I am not strong enough to dig, and I am ashamed to beg. I have decided what to do so that when I am removed from management, people may receive me into their houses. So, summoning his master's debtors one by one, he said to the first, how much do you owe my master? And he said, 100 measures of oil. And he said to them, take your bill and sit down quickly and write 50. Then he said to another, and how much do you owe? And he said, 100 measures of wheat. And he said to him, take your bill and write 80. And the master commended the dishonest manager for his shrewdness. For the sons of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than the sons of light. And I tell you, make friends for yourselves by means of unrighteous wealth, so that when it fails, they may receive you into the eternal dwellings. One who is faithful in very little is also faithful in much. And one who is dishonest in very little is also dishonest in much. If then you have not been faithful in unrighteous wealth, who will entrust to you the true riches? And if you have not been faithful in that which is another's, who will give you that which is your own? So just to start off with a little context here, if you were to go to Luke and look in the Bible, starting in chapter 15 is the parable of the lost sheep. Remember, when go find the night. And then it was the parable of the lost coin. And then there's the parable of the lost sons, which is also known as the parable of the prodigal son. And then Jesus goes right into this in Luke. And it's followed after this with the parable of the rich man and the poor man, the beggar who sat at the gate, and then they both pass away and they're in heaven, and that whole conversation, if you know that one. So this is sandwiched in between all that. So there's a lot of discussion about value and money and how we approach our life. So here we have a rich man, we'll say the head of a large household. Just given the two examples we give, this man has lots of resources that we're marking bills from 100 bushels of wheat to 80. It says he brought all the debtors. They only talk about two, but they brought them all in. to change these bills. And this rich man says he had a manager who was probably like a house manager, keeper of the accounts, the one who's supposed to make things flow. This is what I do. I manage managers. And charges were brought to him that the man was wasting his possessions. Now, the word wasting here, it's the only other time it's used in the Bible in this type of context, was just occurred with the prodigal son who was wasting his inheritance. If you go back there and look, it's the only 2 times that this word, and it's no coincidence that it's right after it. It doesn't say that he was stealing, embezzling. I mean, sometimes we read into this and we start saying, oh, he was doing this and that. But whatever the charge was, he must have been guilty because he doesn't try to defend himself. And having been in this position many times, everybody tries to defend themselves. So he's wasting his possessions, and he calls and says, you can't be the manager anymore. So basically, he fires him. So here's a guy who got up in the morning, thought he had the world by the tail, right? I got it going on. I'm the manager of this big rich guy's house. I've been doing this. But somewhere along the line, he got lazy or whatever it was. He was not managing the way the owner thought he should. I have a saying I tell managers all the time: run it like you own it. You'd be amazed. People don't do that. And there's reasons why that in our own self-interest. But run it like you own it. But he wasn't doing that. So this guy comes along and says, you can't be my manager anymore. So he goes from being this well-employed guy, probably middle-income guy with a good job, probably in a smallish town. Nothing was huge. It wasn't millions of people living in towns back then. So he knew his reputation, whatever it was not going to be such that he could just run out and get another job. I mean, you can tell that by the way he's talking, right? Oh, wow, I don't want to beg. And I'm too old to dig ditches. There's a job I could do, but I'm not strong enough to do that. So he's like trying to work through. And then he comes to what I would say the business principle of leverage. And leverage is something we all use all the time. We don't think about it. It's like air that we breathe. But in our business dealings, we use leverage. This guy has no leverage. But this is where he's really shrewd. He manages, as he's going through this thinking, to figure out the one thing he can leverage, and that is he hasn't finished his account yet. He hasn't handed it all back to the boss yet. He has a little window of time that he can leverage to the boss for his own benefit. Now, leverage is something you might hear, leverage buyouts and leverage this and leverage that. All it really means is using your assets to your advantage. So you have some company over here which has a lot of assets. They have buildings, they have equipment, they have stuff. But for whatever reason, their cash flow, they have no cash. And you have this other guy over here who has lots of cash. But no, he wants his assets. So he will leverage his assets to try and get to be a partner or something in that business without at pennies at the dollar, because he knows that guy needs his cash. So he's leveraging his position. You would do this when you go to buy a car. You're trying to leverage your position. If the one of you in this audience who actually walks in and pays cash for cars, you would leverage the fact that you had cash to pay for a car as opposed to financing and all that, and they'll give you a better deal. So this idea of leverage, but he has one thing he can leverage, and that is he doesn't have to give the account till, say, tomorrow. So I have a few hours, a short time, because he says, do it quick. Come on in, Scott, come in. How much does he owe you? How much you owe him? Cut it down. Because now he's going to, when this is all done, when he's changed everybody's bill, he's now leveraged to them, right? You owe me. I cut your bill by 20 bushels. I did this. I did that. So that in this the guy has nothing. He has nothing going on, but he's shrewd enough to think that he could do this one thing to set himself up When? Right now? Later. And if you read this parable, there's a time thing. It's very subtle through it. It's the time thing. And Jesus explains it. I always, when I first read this parable, I was like everybody. I was like, man, this just doesn't ring right. There's this guy, he's a crook. He's changing bills and doing stuff. It just doesn't seem right. But it's like anything. I just know this in my job. I have let people go, work somewhere else. When I was doing it, I was thinking, if this person had put their effort, their thinking, because they do all these political things and stuff in a large organization, if they had put that kind of thought into doing their job, they would have done a great job. So it's not that you have to commend him for all these things, but seeing what he did caused the boss to say, that was pretty shrewd. That was pretty slick what he just did. Now there's some cultural things that people try to explain, and I don't think it's really germane to the point, but I'll mention it, you may hear it, that it was illegal to charge other Israelites or Jews interest. So that in this instance, what could have been going on, and several commentators say this, is that the guy actually owed him 80 bushels, but to order not charge him interest, he said, well, when you pay me back, you owe me 100 bushels. And so what the steward was doing was actually changing everybody back to their original amount without interest. And so therefore, the manager, the owner, could not accuse him because that would be to expose himself as charging interest. Now, again, back to leverage. When you go in to buy a car and you think GMAC is just being a great buddy of yours and giving you 0%, oh, they gave us 0% interest. Please. The people of this world are more shrewd than the people of light when it comes to business. Next time you look up the 4 windows of buying a car, the price of the car, the interest on the car, the trade-in of the car, and the down payment of the car. They manipulate those 4 windows to get all that out of you. But anyways, I digress. So let's move on here. So he does this thing, and the manager commends him for it. One by one, he forgives them. And the manager commended the dishonest manager, not for all he was, but for his shrewdness. So what does Jesus say about this? He says, for the sons of the world are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than the sons of light. And what interested me when I read this is, of many parables, Jesus didn't give explanation. He just would say, the kingdom of heaven is like, and then he'd tell this parable, and you're supposed to figure it out. But knowing how we are, and the difficulty we might have with that parable, he actually gives us the explanation. So it's not hard to understand what he's saying. He's saying that who are these people in the world? Who are the people of the world? Well, first of all, we're all in the world. We all grew up in the world. We all learn the ways of the world. And the ways of the world are temporary. They're now. They are pride-filled, right? They are, I want it, I want what I want. And these like fleshly human things, and the people of the world, the businesses of the world have spent an unbelievable amount of resources to tap into those feelings that we have. They sit around with focus groups for hours they're made to look like you. Okay, Midwest people, a woman this age, grew up with how can we get her to buy our soap? How can we get her to believe that our soap is better than their soap? A need. Marketing 101 is create a need. I gotta have it. I need to have it. So they are very shrewd out in the world, but the world is temporal. And it only goes till when? when is the world going to end for us personally? And here's another, see, I get two topics that nobody likes to talk about. Money and death, right? It's part of the parable. It's an explanation of the parable. The Lord's return, or that day, whatever that day is, and we're all going to have that day when this life ends and eternity begins. And Jesus tells us, make friends for yourselves by means of unrighteous wealth, so that when it fails, so I just said when it's going to fail. Anybody want to think that if I gave you $20 million in this world today, is it going to fail today? Is it going to fail you today? Well, it does in some ways. I think I told you a testimony of a relative of mine who very well-to-do, very well-off, country club set, and when he came to pass away, I was the only one who went to see him the last 2 weeks of his life. Only one person. So that when it fails, they may receive you into the eternal dwellings. So there's this like subtle time thing through this thing that this happens, then you have to think about what you're going to do, and then you're going to set yourself up for the future, right? Isn't that what the manager did? He had failed. He had to think about what he was going to do, and he set himself up for the future. And that's what Jesus is saying to us, what we should be doing with our worldly wealth. Now, this you might be getting a little right now, because I would be too, because I was when I was. Do I go on vacations? Yes, I go on vacations. Do I have a nice car? Yes, I have a nice car. So I'm not trying to tell you, again, I'm speaking in principles. The bottom line is, if we begin to think like this, we will begin to do like this. I'm not talking about rules and laws. I could have easily pulled up a tithe verse about bringing tithing in, and we could all give our 10%, and we could all be just right. Hey, I fulfilled the law. I gave my 10%. This is not about that. This is a perspective, a viewpoint. Just popping into my head, if you've ever seen the movie Schindler's List. Well, at the very end, he says, they're trying to commend him for what he did, and he says, but this watch, I could have sold this watch, and I could have saved this many more. Or if I'd have sold this car, I could have done this. And I'm not trying to guilt anybody, but I'm trying to change all our perspectives that we are all going to live in eternal dwellings. And won't it be great if we are welcomed in by people that we never met, we never even knew? It'll all be revealed there. So if we devote a portion of our unrighteous worldly wealth to missions, the food cupboards, the this, the that, whatever it is, just helping with needs, people will welcome us into eternal dwellings because we used our unrighteous wealth. And then Jesus, towards the end, I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but he says something that he's going to repeat it when we go into a different parable next week. So next week we're going to do the parable of the talents. We're going to talk more about leverage, but he says the same thing. One who is faithful in very little is also faithful in much. And one who is dishonest in very little is also dishonest in much. If then you have not been faithful in unrighteous wealth, who will entrust to you true riches? I remember when I first became a Christian a long time ago, this is a verse that just popped out at me. Certain verses just grab onto you and you think about them. And it's hard to do because we get put in positions where dishonesty may be the way to go. It may be easy. I was talking to a guy I knew, I still know him. He was having a lot of financial problems in his family and stuff. And in the course of the conversation, he said to me, well, I only work under the table. What? I only work under the table. And I said, well, what do you mean? He goes, well, I only work jobs that I can work without paying taxes. And I'm thinking to myself, and at the time I didn't say anything, that you're not being faithful in the little. The Lord expects us to pay our taxes. He doesn't expect us to break laws and do things under the table. And maybe you're having financial problems because you're not being faithful in little things. And I think he says this here because I think this type of faith is like any kind of faith to me. It's like a muscle. You work it and it gets stronger. So you be faithful in a little bit. Maybe you can't write a check for $10,000 to Nicaragua missions. Maybe you can't do that. But you be faithful in a little bit. And what did Jesus commend the widow for? 2 mites. Just 2 little pennies. Oh, I'm going to trip and fall. 2 little pennies. And he says, she's given more than everybody else. So just be faithful in a little thing. Sponsor a child. I don't know what it is, but whatever it is, just a little thing. Because he says, if you can't use your unrighteous wealth appropriately, who's going to trust to you to lead and to shepherd and to watch over true riches, which is people? At the end of the day, God cares about people. That's what he cares about. He doesn't care if we have the biggest house, the nicest car, the whatever. He cares about people. We get caught up in that other stuff, and I've been caught up in that other stuff. But it's just stuff. And when we get to that day, whenever that day is, that stuff isn't going to matter. And in this process, you might become uncomfortable. The Lord might ask you to do an uncomfortable thing, something that really goes against the grain of you. But you know that prompt, and you know what he wants. And I say, obey. Just obey. So we're going to watch a short video.
Alpha, who got a hold of me.
How do I stop it?
Again.
There. So we're going to watch a short video. Somebody in our church, you might know her, LaDon, who was put in an uncomfortable situation, wasn't sure what to do, prayed, the Lord led her. And if you know LaDon, this totally goes against LaDon. This is the opposite of LaDon. But she decided to obey and be faithful in a little thing, and I'd like us all to watch this.
December is from Sierra Leone, and his name is really long. Alpha Tigo Umaraba. It sounds very kingly or something. But so he is from Sierra Leone. So I met him in 2011 from the Mercy Ship. And he was a tailor that worked close, had a little shop that was close to the port in Freetown. So I got to know him and became friends with him. And so when I left the Mercy Ship, when I got back, I started a organization. I can say that loosely. It wasn't like a real organization, but it was an organization. I organized something, so therefore it was an organization, and we called it Mercy Continued. And what it was to help some of the local kids finish their schooling, because like Nicaragua and other places, you have to have there's things you have to have, simple things you have to go to school. And so Alpha took the kids that were getting funds from that, and he would organize them and have like community projects so that they would, just have a sense of, paying back or paying forward or, So he did that, and then so money that he got from his shop, he would buy, like they all have these, I've got a picture of them here, but they've all got these shirts that he made them so they look official, like their staff, and they're all proud, but they're out doing community projects. And so he did that, and then he contacted me in December, like December 26th, I think, right after Christmas, and said, he's like, I have I hate to ask you, but I am going to lose everything. And then they told me his whole story. He bought all this material, and he had, designers, and all this was supposed to work out because these weddings were coming up, and things were looking really good. And then COVID hit, and everything was canceled. The whole country shut down. But the designers who had, they demanded their money back, and they had filed with the police, and the police were going to come liquidate his shop and take all his stuff. First was the 15th, but he got extended to the 31st. So he wanted $3,900 by the 31st. And he said, he prayed and prayed and prayed, and who he came up with. I'm thinking, okay, well, I don't know. Thanks. So I said, well, I will have to pray about that. And so I did, and I thought about GoFundMe because I needed some help. I know it's hard for him to ask me to do that because he's, very, self-sufficient and hardworking and humble, but he's proud too. He's never asked for anything. So he asked me, and it was hard for me to ask other people, but I started the GoFundMe. So I've got like 3 days or 4 days, whatever, to do this. I'm gonna do the GoFundMe, and then it was like, it's kind of like throwing a party, and what if nobody shows up, kind of thing, like, oh. But I thought, okay, I'm gonna start this GoFundMe, and I felt like I really needed to help him, and I couldn't be indifferent to it, and I thought about, about an amount I could give him. I thought, but that's like not really what he needs. He needs this $3,900 to not, So I started the GoFundMe, but it was very uncomfortable. And every time somebody gave money, it was more uncomfortable. It's like, oh my gosh, they needed that money. I know they needed that money, but it was kind of a good, bad feeling. It's like, oh, I feel so good. It's, they're contributing, and I feel so bad because, they're giving their money. It's not like money, it's not like they can claim it on their taxes as a write-off. You can't claim alpha donations as a write-off. So you're just giving out of your, God said do it, or whatever, out of your heart. So like the first day, it was like, these huge amounts, and I thought, oh my gosh, that's crazy, And then like the second day, it was just stood still. I thought, oh no. Well, and so then I started recalculating. I thought, well, if I add this much to it, it'll be close to half, and then it's like the next day it doubled, and then it just went. I thought, okay, I've underestimated God again. It just kept going, like, oh. So I actually stopped it before it got to, because I hadn't put in my amount that I, knew I could give. I stopped it before it got to the end because I was afraid it was just going to keep going, and it was like too much for me. It's like, okay, you guys got to stop. You're hurting my feelings now. You're like tearing me up. So yeah. It has been a blessing. And Alpha, I can't tell you how many times he was like, oh my gosh, thank you. This is, he's blown away that, he went out of his comfort zone to ask, and I don't think he ever really expected that it could happen, but he had nowhere else to turn, so he did. He'd say things like, it's a turning point, a turning point in his life, nothing he could have imagined. It's an indelible mark on his life, and he was a kind, humble man before, and generous and helpful, and he's like, practically sworn himself to help the needy for the rest of his life now, which I think he basically already did, because that's what I seen him do in Sierra Leone. We'd give him food from the ship and he'd just hand it out to everybody. So I know he's kind to all the people around. But yeah, it was much of a blessing to me just to, people trusted me enough to, consider it, to pray, to give. And, I hope it's, as much of a blessing to everybody that gave.